truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia. A lot of black dog phenomena on night shift. I would see all kinds of things appear in the shadows because of fatigue, or 3 goats would change into some sort of beast. One time I swear I nearly ran over a corgi, which would be astronomical odds there is one in the wild in this part of the outback. One night I pulled up to sleep, let the engine run cold for 10 minutes, then tried to sleep. I woke up to noises. Not voices, but some sort of order to the noises, and the whole cab of the truck was shaking. I looked in the mirror and saw shadows around the vehicle. I turned the truck on and every single light attached to the thing and hastily continued my run to the port. This is a big cab, would have taken a lot to move it. I rationalize it as it being windy, some goats around the truck, and fatigue. Either way scared the frick out of me, and I never slept on night shift again. I've been working and reading this thread for 4 hours now. I was hoping to see a story from a trucker in the outback of Australia. Those rigs are monstrous compared to anything here in the US. Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So I'm driving through the pitch black and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark I miss the last rest stop for the next while. No problem, the highway is completely deserted. So I pull to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car in drive, ready to peel out, but for some reason I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window and I ask what's up. He replies to me in a very serious tone, I need you to call the cops. I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to kill himself, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughters right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was gonna use on himself, so I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. What are the odds of you stopping to pee at the exact same time and place this guy was wandering out of the woods needing help? This is almost supernatural in a positive way. Well, it was creepy at first. I pull into a Purdue plant, drop my empty trailer at Go Park where they allow bobtails to sit, right next to a nice little pond. My pickup was in 12 hours, so I do my PTI and lay down in the bunk. At about 3 AM I hear something tapping on my passenger side door. I get up, look out the window expecting to see someone. Maybe a driver asking for a lumper check, but no one's there. Maybe I'm hearing things. So I go back to lay down. As soon as my head hits the pillow I hear the tapping again, except this time it's on my driver's side. Same thing as before. I jump up and look out my window, but nothing's there. Double lock my doors just in case and open my side hatches so I can hear what's going on outside. After about 15 minutes, I hear a very light splat going along the driver's side of the truck. I slowly get up, planning to look out my window at the exact moment whoever it is knocks on my door, and then I hear a thud coming from the roof of the cab. I stop, grab my tire thumper off its hook and ready myself for whatever the heck is going on. Then a motherfucking goose falls off the top of the truck and lands on my hood. It stands up, waddles back and forth and looks at me. As we make eye contact, the tapping at my door starts again. I say frick it and throw open the driver's side door, and there's another dang goose waddling away with all the speed it can manage, honking like a 5-year-old who just found the horn on his new bike. The pond I parked next to had a ton of them just dicking around. Needless to say, it was hard to sleep that night because every couple minutes the dang geese would peck at my door or land on the cab and waddle around. Geese are territorial, so they were probably just angry at you. Used to do deliveries. Not actually a truck driver, though. I used to have this regular that was out in the boondocks, 25m plus out of the way of civilization and smack dab in the middle of 2 large towns. I would drive this route maybe once a month and would always pass at least one car driving towards me due to the sheer length of the drive. There was a small group of old houses on this route that were really broken down and I had never seen anyone around them in 6+ months of driving the route. Always assumed they were vacant because they didn't look livable. Well, I was driving out to this customer one fall afternoon. Had been driving for a very long time without seeing a single car drive towards me. Finally drive past the abandoned houses and there's one old lady in her front yard pushing an old manual grass cutter, but she stops in her tracks as I drive towards her. I took it as a sign I was speeding or something and slow down. I take a quick glance in my rearview mirror after passing by and she was staring straight at me. She dropped the grass cutter and turned 180 to do this. It was just very odd and definitely set off my spidey sense. Never saw her again or anyone else on that route by those houses in the 10 months I drove it. I like to imagine she loved mowing lawns, but that wasn't actually her house. She would just always feel an itch every once in a while to mow there, you know. Not the middle of nowhere, but a trash route in a pretty rural area. We were at a stop loading trash when a pickup stopped behind us. A petite woman in scrubs that were covered in blood got out and asked directions to Lake Jack Nolan. She said there was a deer that had been hit by a truck and she had been sent to remove the remains. She never said who sent her, but she wasn't moving a deer anywhere at her size. We gave her directions and sent her on her way. We all said we wondered if she was going to dump a body or something. She was already covered in blood in a nice truck and was supposed to be on her way to move roadkill that was far too heavy for her to handle. Then we went back to work. People that care for large carnivores become adept at tossing roadkill into their car or truck. Some even equip their truck bed with a winch. The blood isn't surprising either. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson, AZ up into Salt Lake City, UT. Well, this was a few years ago and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away, so it is completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Anyway, around 4 AM I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point I'm wide the F awake and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. That's hilarious but also scary, lol. Parked off an exit ramp at about 3 AM for my 10 hours. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. Started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in and out the corner of my vision eye, though I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look. Saw the figure but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot. Maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. Highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty, the figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I pinched off and jumped back in. I took off down the highway. Didn't give one crap about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well lit and very full loves. Haven't stopped on a ramp since. I posted this somewhere else recently, but it fits better here. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night around 2 AM I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat, like really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer I noticed it was two people, laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop, but they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes will beat the crap out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Definitely the right move. Another response on this thread spoke of the same thing happening. Only difference I think was that you didn't run them over, lol. COVID was raging, and there was a truck stop, the only one around for a long while. I stopped there and parked, needing to pee badly, but the actual truck stop was closed with no available restrooms, and I had no empty bottles or anything to pee in. So I was desperate and tried to find a secluded spot, and the best place I could find was in some bushes. As a man, my options are much more plentiful. Unfortunately, the spot would be visible to one trucker that was parked nearby, and I saw that he was awake in his cab in the daylight. So I thought it would be polite to approach him and say, "I'm sorry, man. Their restrooms are closed, and I'm gonna go pee in those bushes right there. I wanted to let you know so I don't weird you out." He was an older guy and responded, "No, man. You can just go between my tractor and trailer and pee there on the ground. No one can see you there." I chuckled and said, "Thanks, sir, but if I'm gonna do that, I'll just do it between my own tractor and trailer." And I started walking back to my truck. He called out, No, do it between my tractor and trailer." Something was really disturbing, though admittedly funny, about a guy insisting I pee between his truck and trailer. I was once sitting in my truck in broad daylight at a closed rest stop when some weirdo decided to come up and announce to me he was going to pee in a bush where I could see instead of just going between his tractor and trailer like a normal person. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the third night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow that guy got him out and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. Jesus, I'm so glad your dad survived, but my heart breaks for the others. I bet he had some major trauma from seeing people killed in front of him. I used to drive truck in northern Manitoba. There's a road in the northeast you can drive for several hours and see very few vehicles. This road is quite flat and straight in stretches. Of course, this is deep in the bush. One day I saw something cross the road in the distance. Very large, easily past the hood on my truck, but not long, like a moose or elk, just tall. It disappeared into the bush, and as I drove by the spot, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard days later a tow truck driver describing on the radio his encounter with a similar creature, only he was much more clear he had spotted Bigfoot. This guy went to some length to explain he didn't want people thinking he was crazy, but he was sure what he saw. I asked an Aboriginal client of mine in a nearby community, and he said the elders spoke of them as commonly the same way they spoke of the other animals. I don't know what I saw that day, but I'm certain it wasn't a bear, moose, deer or elk. I just don't know what the heck it was. Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning, my CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere, some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate for miles and saw not one set of headlights. That was Fred. He just wanted you to know he didn't have no panties on. Honestly, though, I have no idea why or when that started, but I've heard it for over 26 years. Leave the CB on, and you will hear it at least once a day. Always a southern drawl, and always said in a harsh whisper. Driving through rural NM, Bisty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining, cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see going 20 miles per hour. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car, sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around a corner, and the whole countryside legit on fire. Like 20 feet tall flames, hundreds of yards in all directions while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. Was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly thought I may have hallucinated it. Checked the news. A propane truck slid off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck. Must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after about not stopping. Don't feel bad. I would not stop for flames in a rainstorm, especially in Skinwalker country. Besides, there really isn't much you could have done, I bet. A good buddy of mine is a long-haul trucker for my company. A few months ago, he woke up in a parking lot surrounded by police. Some dude had gotten shot and dumped 15 feet from his truck. My friend drove for a few years a while back. He told me he was driving a rig very late at night in Utah, driving on a lesser used 2-lane highway. He said he remembers feeling very alert that night, so he noticed what appeared to be a figure manifesting up ahead on the dark road. Told me it wasn't on the road but just next to it. He then comes to a stop and grabs his heavy-duty flashlight and points it at the figure. He then describes it. Apparently this humanoid creature had a dead coyote it was eating, and the truck had gotten its attention and peed it off. So it sorta stands up so he can get a full view of the thing. It was guaned, with very big eyes, and of course the coyote blood all over its face. Its height was about 6 feet 2. It had skinny limbs, no clothing. He then describes how it started to shuffle slowly towards the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at that time, the only usable weapon being his flashlight, is actively helping him view this creature. He decides to book it and leave. Had no problem passing it. Turned around to see it standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away. When he reaches the nearest rest stop, he sees 2 other truckers talking. Apparently my friend wasn't the only one to see the thing. Both the 2 guys looked as horrified as he was. As for my opinion on my friend's encounter, I have to say, my friend isn't one to lie, so his story had me intrigued. I told him maybe what he saw was some mentally ill person out there, but he brushed the idea off, saying he knew what he saw wasn't human. I'm not the superstitious type, but his story really did creep me out. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a mistrunchable bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks frick this and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing misunderstanding. Better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details. Plates etc. And he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same mistrunchable hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. Apparently they have received 3 other calls about the same woman car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Not a truck driver, but I have one weird story from when I was a kid. My parents always took us on long road trips every summer, and my dad liked to take meandering routes through rural towns to see all the tourist traps. One trip, we passed through a little town in Illinois, the kind you miss if you sneeze. This one had mannequins. Every house and business was only populated by mannequins. I don't remember seeing any people. Everything looked maintained and clean, so someone was at least caring for the place. There weren't any signs or anything indicating it was for tourists. Just a convenience store bait shop with a sign reading "Eat here, get worms." Not exactly creepy, but definitely terrifying. My father was a truck driver and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly he got incredibly tired, wasn't low on sleep or deprived at all, but ended up passing out at the wheel. Last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night, going through a slow stretch at about 30 km/h. Every so often I think I see something out the window and beside me, just a glimpse of movement. When I arc though I don't catch it. Finally on about the 3rd time I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. Driving home through what could be considered the outskirts of town, a young woman ran through the street waving at me and yelling something. She was wearing nothing but a t-shirt and panties. There's a lot of homeless people in that area, and a lot of them in my town, so I just kept going. It's fairly common for women to flag a car down and distract them while a bunch of guys scramble out of the bushes to frick you up and take your car. About a mile down the road I realized she didn't really look homeless. I felt guilty for not stopping, and the ethical thing to do was risk the carjacking for the possibility the woman was in danger. Crappy people shouldn't turn everyone else into crappy people with fare. The woman was gone. I only passed one car when I flipped around. A blue, 99's Toyota. There are no stores or houses. Just sand, dirt, rocks, brush. Later that night it occurred to me that she may have been running from the man in the blue Toyota. I hope she was a carjacker. Please consider calling the police or emergency line when you see something like this. You don't put yourself in danger, but also get help for the person in case they're in genuine distress, or the police will find the hijackers. Not a truck driver, but a few years ago I was driving back from Georgia to Arkansas. The trip usually means I cross into the northern part of Alabama, where I normally take a wee nap at this one rest area. I take my nap, go pee, and get a Red Bull from the vending machine. I get back in my car at 1:32 a.m. and start driving. The highway is completely deserted except for me. Found it weird but shrugged it off. Next thing I know it's nearing 6 a.m. and the sun's coming up. My gas tank was near empty. At the rest stop I had 3/4 a tank. My odometer shows I've driven like 250 miles, but my GPS showed I was only about 10 miles from the rest area. I have no recollection of the time lost. Just poof, gone. That's one heck of a Red Bull. Years ago I read an answer on a thread with this question, about a guy who was riding with his truck driver father as a child. They were in the middle of nowhere and they were coming up on a person laying in the road with no one else around, no cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move. He blew it again as he got closer. They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods, and the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery or worse and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. No clue if it was true or not, but I think about that story all the time. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 AM. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, and so he slowed down to about 30 miles per hour. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head, not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, pig head lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed until he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.